Well, good afternoon, everybody. We're happy to have you with us for today's talk. Delighted to have a wonderful cast of characters. Beatricia Sagar, who is an artist and author, presently with us from Miami, Florida. Gracie Mansion, who is an art advisor and curator and former pioneer in the East Village with the Gracie Mansion Gallery. Andreas Sterzing, who's a photographer now based in London. Russell Sharon, of course, our great artist, and Judy Glantzman, a very talented young lady who was very much with Russell, part of the East Village scene, and Beatricia when everything was happening in the early 80s. So off we go for a talk. I thought we might start with letting each of you talk about your favorite memory of the East Village. But before I do that, I want to introduce Katie Svensson, who is here with me at the gallery in Tribeca. Katie has organized, with your good help, a wonderful series of images that she will call up to the screen share at appropriate moments during our discussion. And some of them may prompt further talk depending on all of our memories. So back to that key question, what's one of your favorite memories of the whole East Village scene?
Who are you talking to?
B, do you want to start?
I could start if you're ready.
Yeah, no, I could start. I think for me it was just that it was there. You know?
Do you remember
because
that?
it had, you know, it had such a different vibe. It was at a time, you know, when people were dying all over the place, gay men. And yeah, just that it was there because it presented, it was like it opened up almost as a community in my eyes. You know, it wasn't, oh, this gallery, or let's go over here to Soho, or let's go. It was more, I think, because things were closer, or a lot of the galleries were owned by young people. So for me, you know, being a little bit older, that witnessed, you know, the history of art moving to the United States. Yeah, it was just that it was there.
And it was close knit, is what you're saying too, I think.
Yeah, it was more like a community. More, I mean, it wasn't in the home sense of community, but a community of similar aspirations. Mm-hmm. and youthful aspirations, even certainly by the artists, but even by a lot of the gallery owners were very young. So it had a communal, youthful spirit to it. Yeah.
And you had experienced part of the scene when it was in the West Village. It was a little bit of that too, right? So you saw that.
Well, too. Soho, mostly Soho. But no, I mean, I witnessed, you know, the early, what would that have been? I don't even know the dates, but you know, all of those artists that were getting to be known in what date was that? I have to think of one of the artists.
Music was a big thing then, but the artist was just before. You met a bunch of them just before Andy Warhol came on the scene. That who would Rauschenberg and that ilk would you hang around with? That was a totally different spirit, both at the time and coming from the they still had something of a very strong macho presentation of themselves, and that they could be openly fairly sexist, as is evidenced by how many women artists were shown at the time, and very good poets. So B did write very beautiful poetry, and a lot of people did and do.
Andreas, as a keen visual observer with your camera, what was your earliest memory of the village?
Well, for me, you know, I came really from the outside, not knowing anything about this when I came to New York.
Mhm.
And I was a young, naive, but enthusiastic guy from Germany who came to New York at the end of '82. And I was looking for something, for like a story, because I wanted to work for magazines as a photographer. And I happened to find that the Pier, for some reason, I don't know how that happened, but I went, and the first time I went to the Pier, so that was probably one of the moments that was really important for me, because when I went there, there was Stephen Lack was there, Rhonda Swillinger, Ruth Klickman, and Peter White, and British artist. So they were in that space, and I met them all, and I had no idea. They were very jolly. They're all smoking joints. We're all having a wonderful time. It was like a little party there in the Pier. And they told me about David Wojnarowicz and Mike Bidlow, and they started this whole thing about the East Village art scene, that everybody was there. So that's how I learned and heard about this the very first time. I had no idea about this. And then I went to the East Village, and I was warned before, you know, from people who said, oh, this is dangerous, Alphabet City, you shouldn't go there, you get marked, you get killed, you get, you know, and all these things. And I went there, and I had the complete opposite experience from what everybody said. I find it very friendly. I found everybody really open, like you said, Beatricia, you know, it's exactly like that. It was like a community spirit. Everybody was open to everybody else. There was, you know, money wasn't that important. And it was really, really, really friendly time. So that was how I started, and how I, you know, I don't remember how I met everybody there. But for example, with that Pier, all those pictures I took, I was so fascinated by that place that I went back many times. And I think, Judy, I think I met you at the Pier as well. Yep. For the first time, you know. But what I did, so I would then just go in there and take pictures of people I meet. And sometimes I would write down their names, sometimes I wouldn't. This was anonymous. It was all these weird things happening. But then what I did, for example, I never met David or Mike or Russell at the Pier, or you know, Luis Frangella. What I did instead, I asked people, once I knew they were doing work at the Pier, I asked them to go back with me and to take pictures there. So that's what I did with David and with Mike, because I knew they were sort of the most important. They were the people who started this whole process at the Pier. You know, David, who got together with Mike and said, look, here, let's talk, let's tell our friends about this, and you tell other people about this. And it exploded, you know, it went into this whole huge uncontrolled thing. So I took them back into the Pier and did photo shoots with them, also with Luis, for example. Yeah, these are some of the pictures. Thank you. I want to go to that. Yeah. So some of these pictures happened, you know, on just because I was there and looked at it and went in. But a lot of the portraits were like, this was one, you know, Judy, this was one I took of you when I met you the first time, I imagine, you know, because it was the only time I met you. But then others, they were basically set up, fixed, you know, like the one with Luis and the one with David. Like this one was, I took them back, I asked them, come back to me to the Pier, and we take some pictures there. So that's why, and this became an iconic image afterwards. You know, of course, at the time we did all these things by intuition, I would say. You know, it wasn't much planned at the time. I mean, on this one as well, this was one I took of Luis when I asked him to come back to the Pier with me one time and said, let's take some pictures in your rooms, you know. So anyway, that's how all these things happen. So for me, if you ask about the happiest moment, I think that Pier experience was what for me was a really defining moment. That's Russell's room. And Russell, I never met you at the Pier, but I remember I asked a whole group of artists to come into the Pier, back to the Pier with me, and you were one of those artists, and Judy was there as well. And we had a whole big group shot going on there. That was like months later, you know, much later, because the whole thing, the whole atmosphere changed in there and everything else. So this were really for me were crucial, and I think for a lot of people who went to the Pier, and maybe Judy and Russell, you can talk about that as well. You know what it means, what it meant to you. For me, it was that Pier that started everything. And then, you know, I met Gracie then somehow in the East Village, and you know, so one thing led to another, and I just started documenting and photographing everything, and then started getting work through these pictures which I took to Germany, and then I started getting work as a photographer and did stories about the East Village art scene, you know, for magazines. So this was all, a whole thing rolled into one. Anyway, it's enough for me for now. That's Judy. Yes, and then also I went to artist studios, and that's of course, Judy, you know, I visited you in your studio because I became friends with a lot of the artists, and you know, Russell and Louis, I went to your studios then. That's where I took the pictures that are being used, you know, that Hal is shown for this exhibition there as well. Anyway, yeah.
Judy, I want to ask, in the portrait of you at the Pier, you're holding what appears to be a huge brush. Can you talk about how it was to create work on that scale?
Well, you know, it was a brush attached to it, like a broomstick.
Okay.
But I mean, it was fantastic. I remember when I was thinking about the moment, I was thinking actually of, and they're all kind of, the time is sort of collapsed, but the walking in Russell and Louise's place when you went up those stairwells up to the, like when I first got to their space, you know, on I guess Duane Street, and you would go up to the roof, I guess, that there was something so magical, and it was really through Hal that I heard about the Pier through different people that were in a group show that I was in at Hal's, and then went down to the Pier. So the Pier, and actually Liz and Val were the first people to bring me down to the Pier. So the Pier was just this magical thing. And also you had to kind of be conservative about what you were going to bring there, because it was a kind of a, you know, it was a schlep to get there. So I think that probably those three colors, you know, black, blue, and red were probably the colors that I had. And the brush, you know, that I said, and it was this enamel paint that I was using at the time. But I think the word community is really the you know, community based on, you know, joy and pleasure in making things, and a kind of a unimpeded, you know, when you say you make it that big, it's like you had to go there and kind of deal with, you found a wall, and then whatever, you know, it was kind of falling apart, and you had what you could bring over there. So to me, the whole thing was really magical, but definitely thinking about that place on Duane Street and meeting everybody, and somehow, yeah, feeling like we were involved in something that was, you know, really special, very beautiful, and definitely not involved with commerce or anything else. Nothing substantiated it but us. We were just there to make things.
Mm-hmm. What
So
about
for
you,
me,
Gracie?
it's so great to hear everybody talk this way about the community and the naivete and the fact that it wasn't a commercial venture, because it seems so much of what I read now portrays it in such a different light. And I don't know exactly where that turning point was or how that happened, but it's so frustrating for me to read that, because it's like they have no idea that we all entered into these things kind of like naivete, my God, blindly, you know, oh yeah, sure, we could do that, you know, without much forethought. But I want to talk about my favorite moment. I had a lot of favorite moments, but this one really stands out for me. I did 3 shows in my bathroom, and then I took a job. I was very jealous of all my friends who were bartenders and cocktail people, because they made so much money and they only had to work a few days a week. So I saw this bar opening up on St. Mark's Place, and I went and introduced myself and got a job as a cocktail waitress for their opening. And it's the space that later turned into Boy Bar. But I was terrible. I had no idea. I didn't know you had to have any expertise to do this. I was there for like opening night, and I didn't know how to open champagne bottles. So I had all the customers opening the champagne bottles, and I didn't know that you had to know what like the bartenders put out the drinks, and you had to put in the right thing, whether you put in a piece of lime or lemon or this and that. But anyway, the second show I did was called The Famous Show, and it was the owner took pity on me and gave me the space for free upstairs. It used to be his beauty parlor in exchange for me and the artist. Actually, we worked together and painted it and took all his stuff. It was like waist high stuff. And we had to clear that out, and we pushed it all into the back room. Well, organized it, put it back there. So the second show, I did the first show, and he was really happy because it brought a lot of people into his bar too. So, you know, like a week before that show ended, he said, "I'll give it to you for another month." So I just came up with this idea called The Famous Show and left it completely open for people to bring in work. Maybe it was 2 weeks before, but it was supposed to be portraits of famous people by famous or soon to be famous artists. So people just brought this stuff in, and they would lean it up against the wall, and I'd be like, okay. And then they came back like, you know, the day of, and we hung it all. But at the opening, it was mobbed because there were a zillion artists in this show. I mean, so many artists. And so all their artists and all their friends and everybody, it was like a mob scene. You could barely move. And I was wearing these fantastic red high-heeled shoes, I remember. And the moment for me is my shoe fell off, and before I could put my foot back in, somebody came and picked up my shoe and poured champagne in it and drank champagne out of my shoe. And it was like, oh my God, this is the best.
What was that space that you were clearing out to do that show? What had it been?
At Paul McGregor's hair salon. And Paul McGregor was this really famous guy that shampoo was, he always claimed that shampoo was made about him. And he was the first person to do the shag haircut.
I might just add a little something to what Andreas was saying. I kind of have what I call a New York nose for where things are happening. And Huck had just come to New York about, I don't know, maybe 6 months before.
You're talking about Huck Snyder?
Yeah. And I said to him, oh, we have to go over to the East Village because a lot is going on there. And he said, no, it's dangerous there, it's dangerous. So I said, well, okay, let's take a taxi in and a taxi out. And we got a certain amount in, and he said, oh, no, turn around. I'm not going there. And then the next day I said it again, and I said, this time we have to go there. And we did, and then of course he had a show there almost immediately after. And then I had a show after.
To get a taxi there.
No, we took it in from the East Village and then figured it out from where I was in Soho.
Yeah, well, once you were there, you couldn't get a taxi back out again. Like when I lived with, Sarah and I lived together on 8th Street between C and D. And, you know, I would have to walk all the way to 1st Avenue or 2nd Avenue to get a cab. So I can remember one day going to this very fancy, I had like a strapless dress and the opera gloves and the whole thing, glitzy jewelry. And I had to walk all the way through the East Village, which was, you're right, dangerous and just blocks of rubble to 2nd Avenue where I could finally get a cab. And cabs would refuse, you know, when I would give them the address to take me home, they were like, no, you don't want to go there. You know, are you sure? Yeah.
So what you're showing now is the first one was the show that I had at Civilian Warfare. And this was kind of interesting because I had just been traveling in Europe, and in Europe, and especially in Hungary, I saw all these soldiers, and I realized that in US I wasn't, you know, you'd see them in uniform. In US, occasionally you would see a sailor maybe in uniform, but you wouldn't see soldiers. And so this particular show, Unknown Soldiers, was inspired a little bit by that and by the name of the gallery, Civilian Warfare. And I had all of these nets up on the wall, and I painted coconuts that rolled all over the floor. So it was a pretty exciting kind of environment, a little bit more a little bit more involved in things than in paintings, although I did paintings too.
Mm. Was that in 1983 or 84?
I think it was 83.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then this is one from Limbo Lounge.
And Limbo Lounge, B, was one of a number of clubs that became very popular in the East Village. There was the Pyramid Club, there was Limbo, 8BC, and I remember Luis and Russell and other artists became very, very involved in creating backdrops and stage sets for performances at these clubs.
Yeah, well, Huck and I in particular, we did something called Little Red Riding Hood. I think, Russell, what were you in Little Red Riding Hood?
I was a brute with the axe.
Yeah. So it included, you know, a lot of other artists in different parts. I don't know if you know Hebe Joy, but I asked her to be a tree and she was thrilled to be a tree.
I thought you were going to say she was great as a tree.
She was great as a tree.
I'm here, so I don't know if you can hear me, but yes, I was a tree.
A tree in autumn with beautiful red hair, red leaves.
And this one now is a show that we did in Germany. We were invited by this gallery, and we met her, and Huck spoke German, so it was kind of nice. And then she invited us back and gave us a studio, and then we had 2 shows. And that was where the photo I was talking about, Be With Blue Drink, done by Nan Golden, was taken. It's a very famous photograph.
No, it was Huck Snyder, actually, who I met first before anybody else, because he had that space in the West Village.
Yeah, and that's where you met him, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a show we did together.
I mean, it just gets, you know, it was in the air, you know, it was like.
Yeah, yeah.
So this, unlike most things that survive, this actually has a date of January 1984.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, civilian warfare was 83, and then right after that, we started doing things at Monkey Lounge.
So Monkey Lounge at Blackbird was St. John's Lane at 260 West Broadway. And that was the corner of West Broadway and Beach Street, which was my first outpost down here in this neighborhood. But I remember that little spot. You went down a flight of stairs to get to it, didn't you, B?
Oh, I don't remember that. Did you really?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Katie's going to scroll through a few other pictures that are kind of fun. And there's one of Gracie and Rodney Sir that kind of fits into that description that Gracie was talking about in this walking to find a taxi in the strapless dress.
But this was even, I mean, this was 10th Street between A and B. I mean, that's a whole difference from 8th Street between C and D, like a lifetime's difference.
Right.
Yeah, next to Life Cafe.
How many spaces did you have there, Gracie?
I had this, well, first I had the bathroom for 3 shows. Then I had St. Mark's Place for 3 shows. Then I opened up this space. And when the space next door became available, I took over that space too, because it gave me full access to the backyard. So I would be doing 3 exhibitions at a time. And then a big space became available on Avenue A, and I took that. And then I moved to Soho. Then I had a space on St. Mark's, and then I moved to Chelsea, and then, yeah, I guess that was the last hurrah. was
Well,
a joke.
we were neighbors across the street from each other on Avenue A
Right.
when we had the outpost at A and 11th.
You know,
But
I was sort of new to New York. I came to New York at the end of 1979, so all this happened pretty quickly for
Where
me.
did you come from?
I was living in a commune in New Jersey, in Orange,
Oh.
New Jersey, and going to art school. And I worked at a law commune at that time too, that started around the Chicago 7 trial. So my idea about community was very strong. So when I came to the East Village and opened up the gallery, I felt that it was something like giving back to the community, and that it was very important to me. But in reality, the community didn't really walk through my doors, except for one like really great, probably 9-year-old boy who hung out all the time and did lots of stuff for us. But it's interesting that we were right there on the street, and people from the community didn't come in.
Mm.
Which,
so when you came in 79, is that your first space was the Lou division, right?
that was in 82.
Yeah. Oh, 82. Okay.
Yeah.
So you took a little while to kind of gear up.
Well, I came late in 79, probably like November or something like that.
Right.
And yeah, I guess I took a little while to gear up. Yeah.
And
And
then
I did other shows before that because we were always doing things all the time. I mean, I did the limo show where I rented a limousine, parked it on Spring and West Broadway, and sold Buster Cleveland's art out of the back.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I did. And, you know, we were always doing things because it was like a group of artists. So I can remember we did a show in Sir's bathroom one time. And Sir had this great apartment on St. Mark's Place, and it was one of those old-time apartments that had a separate bathroom. The bathroom was in the hall next to his apartment. So he just like tore a big hole in the wall that connected them, and he made the bathroom his front door. So when you went to see Sir, you opened up the front door and looked at a toilet, and then and you turned to the left and went into his apartment. So, you know, we did a show in his bathroom. I mean, we did shows. It was like community of artists. So we did things together all over the place.
Judy, when did you come to New York?
Well, you know, I grew up here since I was like 13. Then I went away to RISD, and then I came back in 79.
Right.
And I was in the,
After RISD, you came back in 79.
after I came back, and at first I had a place in the like 38th Street and 8th Avenue. And then I found this place on Christopher Street, which was how I lived for a long time. And then during this time, I actually sublet my place on Christopher Street to Nina from New Math. And she lived there with her then husband, and I lived on 2nd and B.
So that's what got you into the East Village, was that sublet.
Well, yeah, the way that I lived all the time being an artist was that I had this rent stabilized apartment so that I could always have like a roommate or somehow manage to do it. But so I was showing in the East Village before I was living in the East Village. I was in the West Village.
Judy, didn't you show first at Fashion Moda?
I had a show at Fashion Moda, and that's how I met Dean. That's how I met Dean. And I had the show at Fashion Moda because this woman, Kathy Hazard, was supposed to have the appointment, and she just couldn't make it. So she said, you know, go ahead and take my appointment. I took these giant tubes of paintings up to the South Bronx, and I showed with Anson Sino. And Anson's show was all phosphorescent paintings, so you had to turn off the lights to see Anson's work. So, and Anson brought me down to Life Cafe. That's how I first, but Dean had gone to see that show, and he wrote about it for the New York Native. And then that's how I met Dean.
Great. And Russell, I know, came to New York from Boston with Luis. And here we have a picture of Russell at the Elk Street studio that was taken by Andreas in 1983. But Russell, I think you actually came to New York earlier than 83, right?
I arrived in New York in 1975, and I had planned on going to New York, just moving to New York from Minneapolis. I'd been in Minneapolis for about a year. I studied in Mexico for 3 years before that. So I had been all over the place, and was in New York and Boston for 2 years. where I met Luis, and we always had planned on moving to New York.
Right.
He was studying at the advanced visual department at MIT, and I worked there as well. Actually, I studied ceramics under this Zen master at the community center. It was really great. That's how I got involved with my ceramics. But yeah, Boston was a funny city for me because all students, they're there and they go and they back and forth and then they leave, and population is changing all the time. And when you get to New York, it's so easy to meet people in New York. You meet one, because so many interesting people are there. You meet one, they introduce you to two, and there are very few people who I would reject as friends, or at least acquaintances. Of course, there were some, but very few total jerks. Anyway, I didn't run into them. I met Beatricia on New Year's Eve, because I had met at my birthday party. I didn't want to go home alone, so I thought, well, whoever's on the street, I'll just go home with them. So the first one to look at me. So I did. Went to his loft, spent the night. My birthday is 27th of December, and he was having a party on New Year's Eve, and I met a lot of people there. It was like the UN, people from all over the world, and every single one of them was interesting. And of course, I found B the most fascinating, the most interesting, and the most glamorous. And yeah, I think everybody got really smashed on practically everything, except for B. I didn't. Maybe she had a strawberry colada or some daiquiri. I didn't have anything, but I had a lot of fun with that group. And out of that group, I met a lot of others. And then also the other place, which was really good, was Limbo Lounge, because it wasn't, I never thought of it as a club, really. They sold beer. They didn't sell, and they also sold soup and meals. And those three kids who were running it were so sweet, a little bit naive, but so soft-spoken and gentle. And they had a different show every week. So
how did you and Luis get into creating all of the backdrops and stage sets and things?
That's something, I mean, David did that too. You know, the big painting on canvas that you had in storage for me for such a long time. That was hanging. Actually, he did it for a club, the Limelight.
Mm-hmm.
And artists would just come schlepping in with their work. I mean, and anyone with the painting could get in for free, no problem. And so there was a lot of good art, not very well lit, but the other place is the Pyramid, where lot of, they had activities other than art. I know they went around, they showed films of recipes by artists, and would go to the artist's kitchen, and they would make their specialty, and a lot of them were very unusual. It was such a wonderful, like as Gracie said, it felt like a commune. It was so easy to connect with people. We all had similar interests. Most of us were extremely interesting and interested in so many things we found fascinating, because with fascinating things, and people were everywhere we looked.
And I think because there was so much, like as a gallery, if a collector would come to the show, we would send them to other galleries, because those other galleries would be showing our friends, and we would want them to see our friends' work. And the same with I can remember the first when the New York Times came for the first time. Oh, what was the woman who was the
Grace Gluck.
right? Yes, Grace Gluck. And so she came. I can remember her coming into the gallery, and I think I got heads up from somebody else that she had visited them. So after she left the gallery, I sent them on to Civilian or something, and I got on the phone. She's coming. You know, it's such a big thing for us.
How can I scroll through the image?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, talking about clubs and stuff at the time, there was also a lot of these really small music clubs that were just, you know, jazz musicians, like somewhere on the second floor on, where was it, Avenue A and 7th Street, you know, this little thing. And there was this famous blues.
Robots, Save the Robots?
I don't know what they were called. But anyway, there were all these pop-up things as well. And it was just, I mean, it was just a crazy, amazing, creative time. You know, and you could get in for free. You could talk your way into it was $5 entry fee. Well, no, I don't have $5. They let you in anyway, you know, and it's like, and you always had these, oh yes, I remember, you know, like for Danceteria and stuff in these clubs, you always had the invites, you know, there's free tickets that these promoters handed out all the time, left and right and stuff. So it was just kind of hilarious, I thought, you know, but really good.
First do this one.
Yeah, and these clubs where everyone from the bridge and tunnel people would come over by the mobs and swarms. And
yeah, well,
very, very long lines, and the artists, we didn't look.
That's right. You would never go on weekends.
But we would just breeze right in, you know, without,
Yeah, that's right.
We were considered to be very special birds.
Yeah.
And later on, do you remember Gold Bar? It was kind of like a very, very upscale. And it was Rocket's Red Glare was the doorman, and it was tiny Red Bar.
Yeah.
Or Gold Bar, sorry.
Yeah.
Or no, was it Red Bar?
Oh, there was something called Gold Bar.
It was Gold Bar. It was Gold Bar. Yeah, I think.
Red Bar. There's someone said Red Bar. Red Bar, maybe.
Maybe Red Bar.
Gold Bar was later, I think. I think it was later, wasn't it?
So
it was later. I mean, later being 85 or something. You know,
okay. Russell, what's your memory of the first awareness of the East Village as a scene since you were down on Elk Street here in Tribeca? How did you sort of get connected to the East Village, and when was that?
The first time I went to the East Village, I went with Beatricia I had been through the East Village a lot because I used to go wandering around there, and I had some people who were working for me way over in the alphabet, and where no one would go on account of the extreme danger. I never felt any danger at all. Everyone was very decent, or scared of me, I don't know. But I guess only brave people were in that part of town. Maybe a usual thing in New York, but so many people wouldn't even drive through. And I went to Keith Haring's show, and then I started. That was sort of early, and then suddenly the gallery started popping up, and that was what I was interested in. And every opening had
what else do we have?
Crowded, often with
like in that.
the same people, but with other new people, and the excitement was everyone is so happy and young.
But even before the East Village, do you remember when Keith Haring curated, I think 2 shows, but one show was called The Drawing Show at the Mud Club?
Yeah.
And that was before there were any galleries. And I know when he went and visited every artist's studio, he came to my studio, he picked what he wanted to be in the show. And then it was, you know, when you arrived the day of, he was like, gave you a hammer and a nail and said, put your piece up on the wall, and everybody hung their own things. It was up for a night. And Club 57, they did those one night shows also, you know.
And it took a while for the collectors to show up in their limousines but not that long once I figured out they were good artists and there were bargain prices. So,
Right.
remember Dean Sagar said, we don't pay any attention to anyone that doesn't arrive in a limousine.
I remember at least one
Right,
time
so-
getting up,
What was it?
actually painting on in one of those. I think that there was, they'd have like, events where you would get up and paint on the stage, even not just install paintings.
I remember all of your work, Judy, that you were doing in that apartment on Christopher Street. Is that where you had a lot of works on paper, figures, beautiful. The way everything you do is beautiful. These are the faces of women and sort of football players and stuff. I have some of them here that you're giving me, and I was especially impressed by the way you just walk over the top of the paintings. I do the same thing, talking all the time, and you had an awful lot of work not to come out of that apartment, and it was so beautiful. And another, where did you do the show of the doors? Remember you had all these big heavy industrial doors with
That's crazy.
Yeah.
But I have my friend Elliot has it still. The portrait you did, you got it of me on you would paint in a shower curtain or a clear plastic that you would see them from the other side. I have one of those of me, Russell.
Yeah, but this was a door from a building. I think, did you do quite a few of them and show them at Limbo Lounge? They were 200 pounds. I don't know how you handled
Those are those giant doors. They were they were enormous. They were enormous.
Yeah, filled with iron.
Yeah, that show was the turning point for me for sure.
What year was that, Judy? Do you remember?
Climbing show?
Oh, you're talking about the
Climbing show was how things began.
That was 84.
That's where we met, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And the doors was 85. That would have been Gracie was 85.
Mhm.
I put it up, and then when I left, I forgot it there. I rented the place out, and the city came over and tore the building down. Now there's a burial ground. They found a lot of bones that, they used to dump the bones of poor people or blacks, or in a Digby Hole, and that was the cemetery. And that was at the corner of Duane and Elk Street. So where they meant to put up the new federal building. I guess they did put up the new federal building, but they had to put it around what had been my building. So they really went ahead and torn it down anyway. But it was really a lovely place to work.
They put the federal building a block away, Russell.
Yeah, on the other end of the block, right?
Yeah.
Well, there ended up being two federal buildings where there were always lines for passports and this and that. We had a nice view of the courthouse and the other direction, City Hall. That was that in your gallery? That was huge. Louise did so many of those huge sculptures out of cardboard, by big sheets of cardboard, and a lot of them were portraits of friends or people he met. And,
This actually was a commission project that a collector wanted Luis to do in his home. So in this photograph we're looking at, the collector seated at the table in his home with the finished wall that Luis had painted. And I think this was the result of our show when Luis painted all the gallery walls here at West Broadway floor to ceiling,
Oh, man.
looking at 14-foot high ceiling height, and Luis painted the entire gallery with these huge torsos, which was very much out of the Pier kind of idea. And then he hung paintings on top of the painted walls. And Richard Boston had seen the show and was very taken by it and commissioned Luis to do this
Wow.
work in his house.
That's a great picture. That's a great picture. Make good wallpaper if they're going to use it, if you to use it that way.
Yeah.
That was one of the most powerful shows I've seen.
That one.
So much energy went into that. So this is a room.
Yeah, this is a room in his home in Indiana. And here we have Luis did this huge hanging sculpture of Mickey Mouse, and it was complete with a soundtrack. So you put on a pair of Mickey Mouse ears and you could hear Mickey talking. So Luis had set up the director's chair, and the whole thing was phenomenal. It was such a great installation. And I remember after this exhibition, at some point, Luis had done, Russell, you'll remember this, he had done a number of big sculptures like this. Some of them had been shown in Europe, but the ones that were surviving in New York, in a fit of rage because he wasn't selling enough of them to anybody, he destroyed them all.
Yeah, he did. He didn't, you know, if you put 3 or 4 of them in a space, you wouldn't have any room to move. And I don't know, could have found storage space, but it just gets to be too much. I suppose he was frustrated because he knew they were brilliant, and yeah, I think they should have sold. The people didn't realize it was too freaky, I suppose, or too big, most likely. I still have a lot of drawings of the Mickey Mouse. He went through a Mickey Mouse period. And a few mini mouses, mice, a few mini mice.
This reminds me of all of those backdrops for the clubs that were so wonderful. I don't know how much documentation there is of any of those. Andreas, did you ever take pictures of some of those club stage sets?
I think the only one that comes to mind, but that must have been in 85 or 86, was at the Palladium. There was something with the East Village where a lot of East Village artists did a collaborative, almost like a performance or something, you know.
Yeah.
And then one other thing I remember was also later on, Luis painted 8 BC, you know, the outside of the building, on the corner, the front and the side of the he put a big head on there. And I think there was something with because I think Spielberg did some movie there. So there's something that said underneath, it said a dollar sign. There was a dollar sign, and then Spielberg, B-U-R-G, go home, or something like that was under there, which was great, you know. So a little political statement there, you know. So
well, you know that Huck Snyder, who I met when he, I don't know, maybe he was 25. I had a gallery in New Hope, Pennsylvania, and he started working for me. And then we went on to do a lot of stuff together. And he insisted on having a stage in anything that we ever did. And so he really did stage sets all the time. So he has to be remembered for that, because and then he started doing stage sets for John Kelly. Amazing. They were amazing. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And if you ever need any documentation, I think Hebe Joy has 20 shoeboxes full of pictures. She was everywhere all the time, and she was especially with John Kelly, the mistress of it all, and did so much pro bono work for everyone, including documenting.
Well, we have to get together with Hebe. I think Hebe's on the call with us. So she's probably listening to this, but here, Russell, we have some of your wonderful sculptures in a vacant lot. I don't know how we finagled it, but we got the city to give us permission for you to use this lot across the street from the gallery at Avenue A and East 11th.
I remember very well how we got it.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yes, I went in. You wanted. I was just going to do it. You said I needed to get a permit. I went to the office at the City Hall where they issued such things, and they gave me such a hard time, and I got angry. I got frustrated, really frustrated, because it looked like worse than that, because everything that's in the sculptures are picked up and put it together into these, I don't know, dinosaur-looking things. And so I just said, well, you're making it really difficult for me to make it the very dirty part of the, corner of this block look into a sculpture park. I'm adding so much value to it. And so, just forget it. But Hal didn't forget it. So he finally, after I had the work finished by the time you got the permit, and you had about a volume, like 600 pages that you had made it in order to make it official. And I congratulate you for your perseverance.
And these, of course, were related to the works you did at the Miami Art Museum at their sculpture courtyard outside. And here you are with the lightning and the rain, which was such a fabulous installation. But this was just...
It's a beautiful picture that there was the Miami Herald photographer took a lot of pictures.
And you're wearing the hat.
I am wearing the same hat.
Yeah.
My pink t-shirt, somebody still knows.
Go to that.
I love it because that's actually the way lightning stands on the top of a rain pedestal. Sort of naive, but I had in mind the images of more the Maya than the Aztec, but I guess there's some similar, the unusual looking monsters of, the feeling was the same, I think, especially the two-headed snake.
But in all of these, there seems such a great connection between the sculpture here in Miami, the sculpture that you did at the vacant lot, the stage sets at the clubs like 8BC and Limbo, the huge overscaled work out at the Pier. I think there's a wonderful connection between all of these that was very much part of the East Village energy. And, Gracie was involved in, Judy was involved in, Beatricia, David, certainly Luis with his wonderful backdrops and things. It really was a magical moment that felt very free, but very rich at the same time. I mean, rich in terms of what there was to see and experience.
To see for a minute, we had Judy Glantzman's portraits of all these village people up on the screen.
Yeah, we're going to go back to that.
Oh, good.
Yeah, that's great.
Those are amazing.
And there's Luis, and Russell's in here too.
Everybody's in there.
Yeah.
Everybody, yeah, that's right.
And
Yeah, I'm in there too, as somewhere.
Yes, you are. You're probably holding something. The when I talked with Katie the other day, like I think it was the real pleasure in making things. That was the core of it. Real pleasure in throwing things together and making things. That was the kind of center of what we did. So that was the that was the spirit of it.
And what year was this, Judy? Do you remember?
85. This was
85.
Stevie Adams Gallery.
Right.
It felt so dangerous when I was watching you doing. You sketched it out with this skill set. No, it was hand saw with just twisting, and it wasn't on a table. You just had it there. pushing the saw through the, what was it? It was
Luau.
and thin plywood, and then twisting it and forming it into, very, you picked up the way people moved or their stance. So Luis would always set the way, he is there, and you can recognize them just by the way they hold their bodies. How many did you do?
We blow up any of these?
66.
No.
Wow.
But we did it in 3 months. So it was like a really crazy.
It didn't take you long. I mean, because you're fast. And you can talk and chew gum at the same time. And,
Amazing, yeah. Right.
I had such a good time that day. There was a day you cut my hair too, and it was a beautiful job. Snip, snip.
It
Great.
was
I think Rick Kroll took the pictures. Not Rick Kroll, sorry.
Eric Kroll.
Eric Kroll, yeah. Yeah, he is
Yeah.
great character, Eric Kroll.
And the other photographer who was doing portraits of artists and dealers in the East Village was Timothy Greenfield Sanders.
And yes, and also Tom Warren should be mentioned as well in that
Oh,
context, I
absolutely.
think.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
He just had brought out this fantastic book, which is such I think it's an iconograph. It's such a fantastic collection of everybody in there, and his approach was really, I think, very. He set up his studio in galleries and in performance spaces and everywhere, and all over years and years, at PS1 and everywhere, and so he photographed everybody. But my approach was quite different. I was friends with quite a few of the people, so I photographed basically my friends and people who I knew and this group. So it's a different approach. I was more like a street photographer and portrait photographer in terms of I was interested in what certain people are doing, and I followed them, like David and Mike and you, Gracie, and Judy, and people like that. And then but whereas Tom, he has everybody. He has the whole range of the people who are there, which is really a great document of the early mid 1980s art scene there, and it's a great book. I just bought it. I ordered it from Germany, and I was blown away when I saw it. It's really fantastic. I'm in it as well. I didn't even know I was in it,
I think you're on the cover, aren't you?
Absolutely, yeah. No.
Did you do pictures? Did you take photos of those distorted mirrors down in the, what was it called, the Sandy area that became the World Financial Center? There were mirrors there that would distort the image, and I thought it was you who had taken pictures of my reflection in the mirror. And
no, was this art on the beach thing you meant? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it was. And he took a picture of Louise that's sitting calmly on the shore.
No, I was there only once. Must have been in '83 and earlier, something else, or '84. And there were some performances and there were some art installations, but nothing to do with the East Village. I don't know. I have some pictures of it, but not of what you mentioned there. I don't remember any of that.
Yeah, that was Art on the Beach was Creative Time.
Yeah.
There were a number of artists who we worked with. Jody Pinto, Rosemary Castoro, both had wonderful installations there. There was the famous Wheatfield, the artist who had planted seeds, and then the seeds sprouted and the whole beach turned into a wheat field. I can't remember her name. It was a marvelous project.
Yeah.
Gracie, I wanted.
Commented, it was Agnes Dennis.
Agnes Dennis? Yeah, that's right. I wanted to go back, Gracie, to something you said earlier about how dismayed you were to read what people today have said about the East Village. Could you expand on that a little bit? Because I think we didn't catch it all.
Well, I mean, I think that a lot of the things that I read about the East Village makes it sound like we were just out there trying to get attention and kind of media whores or so, which was not our intention. But I think because we were doing something that was so unusual and so authentic that it attracted people to come and photograph us and talk to us and write about us, because it was something completely new. But it wasn't what we were going after when we started that. I mean, it was, there wasn't even enough thought as to like, how am I going to pay next month's rent, let alone, we just went in blindly.
Yeah,
it was so organic that people really could not get their heads around it, how we were basically having fun and we were doing a lot of work, and just because it felt good, not, of course we needed to make some money too, but it's so many people ask you, do you think this sort of thing could be set up somewhere else? It can't be set up, it can't be set up anywhere because it just grew out of the streets in such an organic way. It's not going to happen again soon.
And we did think
so many kindred spirits, so many kindred spirits, but the same age, same interests, same feelings or aura about and enthusiasm. Yeah, it was like a dance.
Do you remember the East Village Orchestra? That was like insane. Keiko and her organized this whole thing, and it was, I don't know. We performed at Danceteria and at the Palladium, and there must have been 50, 60 people in the orchestra. There were like 5 drummers and, like 20 guitar players. And I mean, it was really insane. And I can remember Keiko's only order was, you cannot wear black. So I went into my closet. I had everything I had was black. So I went into my closet and I found like a pink polka dot pair of pants and a shirt that was kind of plaid. And when I got into the taxi driver asked me what country I was from.
You look very folkloric.
Yeah, so very folkloric. And then we had girls' night. I mean, girls' night was a way, for me, it came out of when I worked at the law commune. We used to have meetings every week, and everything was decided on by democratic centralism. So the men were always, we wanted to have the women get together first before the meeting. So we would get our power together when we had to get together with the men. And so my idea was for girls' night was the same idea. Let's make a group of women. And it was writers and filmmakers and artists and dealers and everybody.
Gracie, at the end of Luis's life, you had organized an exhibition, and here is one of the drawings from that show. Do you want to remember for us what that was like?
No, it was wonderful. It was a very hard, I mean, Luis was not well. I mean, I don't know how much longer after that he died, but Russell brought him in a wheelchair. And we did a beautiful show in the back part of the gallery with just his drawings. And there was such a turnout of like love and support for him. I mean, everybody loved Luis so much. And they were these drawings, which you could really, because Luis had such a strong hand, and you really see in these drawings how weak he was when he did these. But he was happy that night, it seemed. But Russell, you could say more.
Yeah, I think he was very pleased that he felt that he was appreciated, and loved, and people came to pay homage to him. I mean, these works are, I think they're so spiritual and so connected, somehow beautiful and childlike, but with, I remember him drawing them, he could hardly move his arms. He would pick up one with the other, and fingers were very weak, but he did many, many, many of them. And I probably have more than.
Oh, it's interesting. I found the list. Hal was asking about this. I found the list and I had written down next to the pieces who bought them. Eggy Gund bought one, Frederica Taylor, Uli, David Herskovitz, Cornelius, Knight Landsman, Karen Carpenter, Marilyn Sable, Judy Rifka, Tom Warren, Regina Trapp. I mean, all these people we know, they were all part of our, extended family.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ted Bonin, Ida Ponticelli. Oh, but there were so many. There were 41 of them. So there were a lot. Paul Haw. It's really nice to look at this.
Yeah, I'm glad you took the time to dig that out, Gracie. That's great.
Yeah, I have to make copies of these and send it to you.
Thank you.
I think I have 3 copies of. I'm going to go get it. It'll just take a second.
Well, we're now at the hour mark, so we should probably wrap up. But I wanted to give everyone a chance who's with us to ask a question or two, if you would like. So if anyone has a question, just speak up. You may jump in at any point and ask away.
Oh, Hal, I have slides too.
Oh, wonderful. That's great.
Installation shots.
So I actually have a question for the girls, for Beatricia and Judy and Gracie. What was it like to be a woman in the East Village? Because I know it was kind of like a boys' club, or it seems like it was a boys' club. Did you feel like there was any prejudice, or like you weren't accepted, or anything like that?
It wasn't a boys' club, really. I mean, that was the great feeling about it. I think historically things shake out, whatever, but I would say there were probably at least as many women artists as there were male artists. And even it wasn't actually sort of, it was pretty open. I think there were a lot of, it was, maybe less straight men, but even still, it was like, I would say that I never had that feeling at all, that there was any, anything. I think it was a powerful women's community.
Absolutely. Sir is writing a book called The Brides and Bachelors of the Lower East Side, which means, the women and the gay men. I mean, that was.
Yeah.
That was the power.
It's funny because I feel like art historically, and maybe this is just from what I've, learned, it feels like it's very, male centric, or at least you guys aren't mentioned as much in the history. But at the time, it was like you're saying, it was very, I guess diverse in a sense.
I've had a lot of difficulty.
Yeah.
Our generation was the first in which women even got paid any attention to. And I think it was largely a result of you guys, and I think the major success of Jenny Holzer, Cindy Sherman, and Barbara Kruger all of a sudden created. But without the Guerrilla Girls, I think we'll be back in the 17th century.
I mean, I was just older than almost anybody around me. And I have never, ever been included in any East Village retrospective. Mm-hmm. This is probably the first time that I'm even here talking about it.
Your role is ageist. I mean, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, I was
sexist.
turned down.
And I know, I mean, there are
over by galleries who would visit me and love the work. I mean, I had a 3,000 square foot loft in Soho. My loft was a center for artists because I had all my friends were much younger than me. Nobody had space. And so I was I built a stage into my loft, constantly having openings, closings for people, having shows for people, having my own shows. But I've never been included. And even Huck really has not really had that much attention from East Village, from the East Village world, even though he was there. And I think maybe I was very connected to him, but I think also that as he moved into more stage with John Kelly, And like you're talking about Hebe was very much part of what he did. I was very much part of what he did. It probably kind of sandwiched me into something that he was really doing, even though I was very much there doing it with him and probably even inventing it. But
Yes, you were.
I have felt it's never stopped me. I've always felt I've had to just figure it out and do it on my own. I'm still doing it. But yes, for me, I did. I have that feeling that I was never.
What do you did 100 statues?
I'm one of those people. I always feel like I was there, but never there.
You only have to read Linda Nochlin to understand really
Yeah.
what's going on. I mean, there were, I think, pretty close to an equal number of women that were showing as men, but it was the men who got a lot of the attention for all the reasons that she pointed out. And like certainly there were a lot of women artists in the 10th Street days, you know, in the 50s.
Mhm.
All beautiful and all.
Now you see them as being more important. Or, you know, the 9th Street Women book really was fantastic about pointing out a lot of those great women from that period.
There were very strong women. At the beginning, there was who was our senator representative from New York? Asbury, the name with the big hats.
Bill Abzug.
Yeah. Bella. I mean, she was amazing. I remember marching up to Central Park from the East Village. And one night, you know, 1 o'clock in the morning, it was a big spontaneous march, no permit. She was up there at the park on top of her car, honking through a big speaker, a bullhorn. She was amazing. It was right after the Anita Bryant orange juice scandal, whatever it was, the election. They turned down the gay rights thing, and
Yes.
Broward County, the two counties. And this is one that Louise did, and this is what one of the people helped us said one day. She said, whatever it says, God is free. And it looks like this, that's not barbed wire. I said it was barbed wire, but it's the crown of thorns, I think.
So does anyone else have any other questions for our panelists?
What's that?
I'm asking if anyone has any other questions for you guys.
I'm looking at the chats and I see Ingrid Dinter has asked a number of questions.
Yeah, if you have a question, speak up. Don't put it in the chat because it's easier for people to answer your question if you just speak.
Barry, you wanted to say something.
Yeah.
Judy, I know you're in the collection of the Whitney, but you haven't been in a biennial to my knowledge.
No.
And that's something right there. Look at your record. I was very happy to see that Jane Dixon at the age of 69, which is pretty much what you're a little younger than that, made it into her first Whitney biennial at 69. She's been showing for 40 years or more, maybe 45 years. So that's an indication. I think that we've caught up much more on artists of color than we have of female artists. It's amazing how slow it is. We thought we could maybe fix that. And also, although Gracie is right in pointing out that there were a hell of a lot of women artists from, you know, Frankenthaler and people all the way back, but Mary Boone, we used to make fun because her first woman artist was Barbara Kruger. And look, Semaphore didn't have as many women as men did. I don't know if Gracie Mansion did either.
I don't think I did, but to be honest, I didn't even think about that at the time.
Well,
You
that's
know, you just showed who's, you know, the people whose work you responded to or whatever. I mean, I definitely had women artists, but maybe not as many.
It was a time. I mean, maybe we were in passive systemic racism and sexism and didn't even know it. I mean, we were showing a lot of white men, and Semaphore had, you know, one Black artist, a couple Asian, and 2 Hispanic. But I mean, mostly the rest were just, you know, middle-class white people.
Yeah, I think the East Village in general was that more middle-class white men and women. Yeah, but there were not a lot of Black artists, were there? Or a lot of.
There were a lot around, but I don't think
Not
many
sure.
of them could really like Adrian Piper. I mean, look how great she was. I didn't hear much about her, or the one that does the jewel like well, I can't think of her name right now, but a lot of my students look at.
Oh, Nicolene Thomas?
No, I'm thinking of the woman that had a big show at the Modern, does these jewel like star things, Black artist. It'll come to me.
Josie Gagosian. It's
Yeah, senior moments here everywhere.
Right.
Very
On the
famous.
tip of our tongue. But Yeah,
Any other-
I only knew one or two black artists that were really active in the art world, and one of them was my friend Joe Lewis, who was showing quite a bit.
Well, if
But
you
it
went
was-
to see the Lorraine O'Grady show, you saw that she talked about, she had curated a show called Black and White very early on at Ken Culliva House. And I think David Hammonds was in that show. There were, quite a number of, it was a very important show, but it didn't get noticed. A, because it was Ken Culliva House, which was owned by, Black proprietors maybe, and it was a non-for-profit space. But, when all these things come out about the East Village, they rarely mention that show. And she had asked John Fechner to commissioned him to do a big piece outdoors, and that gets photographed all the time, but they never mentioned her or that show or Ken Culliva.
Any other questions?
Well, I don't have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, you can. Sorry, I'm sorry, I'm blacked out. I have a terrible background here. I don't want anyone to see it. Sorry, but yeah, I'm listening to all this with great interest, and I certainly know Gracie, so she knows where I'm coming from, and recently had a great visit with Hal, and we talked about a lot of this. And unfortunately, Andreas, I don't think we ever met. I've been
No,
here
I don't
since
know.
1981, and I actually came here from the Städelschule.
Ah.
So considering all that, I can't believe our circles never crossed back then in the Red Bar and all these other places. But anyway, I have been here in the East Village ever since 1981, still here on Avenue B. So I'm still watching everything that's going on. 1984, I worked for Pat Hearn on the corner of 6th Street and Avenue B.
Oh,
Um,
that
We
kind
had
of,
very few women artists.
Well, I have to say, with all due respect to Pat Hearn, and particularly what she did later on at the time she opened her gallery, she modeled herself on Mary Boone, and Mary Boone was very much no women in my gallery, thank you. And Pat was pretty much the same thing. And I heard this in these circles. It was definitely, but this was typical of New York as well. When I came here in 1981 from art school, it was impossible to break in. And there were just one or two artists. There was Susan Rothenberg, there was Jennifer Bartlett, and that was pretty much it for quite a long time.
Elizabeth Murray.
So,
It's the ones who kept
yeah.
right? The known,
Sorry?
I think it was the ones who could make the known artists, the known women artists who could bring in quite a bit of money. It's probably a little bit more difficult because all of the everyone was hard on women. They didn't think they would sell their work. They could sell their work. It happened to
Well,
be.
it's all based on sexism, and it goes back millennia. It's just the old patriarchy thing forever. It's been there forever.
I see a lot of changes now. I'm so happy just within the past 10 years, in the media, there's women, all the news people, and there's so many, I think more than men. It's very reassuring because I'm tired of seeing these old white men like me.
I mean, Russell,
Go ahead.
in this photo, you look so fabulous, but I don't know who that woman is with you.
Barbara Green, she had a gallery, and she showed that she did a big East Village show. And she showed East Village artists.
Who?
Barbara Green.
No, but who's the woman?
That's Barbara Green.
That's who?
Barbara Green.
It says it down below.
it's on the thing.
Oh, I didn't see it.
The other one I know is that she
I
has,
think it was
she
Ava.
has a twin somewhere in New York. At her party eating ice cream. The only reason I really like her is because she always has ice cream. Haagen-Dazs is really good ice cream. That's Beatricia Sagar. But this is Barbara Green. The other one is Barbara Green, where Hal is looking one way, I'm looking the other way, and we're completely ignoring her. She's talking.
No, Barbara was actually looking up at one of your tall bird sculptures, Russell, in that photo.
Oh.
Well, dear friends, it's been great to have you all with us. We're going to close up this session, but it's been terrific talking with you all. And thanks to those in the viewing audience who've come forward with good thoughts and questions. Very appreciated. And we'll see you next time. Until then, be well and take care.